Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 27, Gandhism and Pacifism. And we start with topic the non-violent society. Gandhi says that non-violence is not merely a personal virtue. It is also a social virtue to be cultivated like the other virtues. Surely society is largely regulated by the expression of non-violence in its mutual dealings. What I ask for is an extension of it on a larger national and international scale. All societies held together by non-violence, even as the earth is held in her position by gravitation. But when the law of gravitation was discovered, the discovery yielded results of which our ancestors had no knowledge. Even so, when society is deliberately constructed in accordance with the law of non-violence, its structure will be different in material particulars from what it is today. But I cannot say in advance what the government based on non-violence will be like. What is happening today is disregard of law of non-violence and enthronement of violence as if it were an eternal law. A society based on non-violence can only consist of groups settled in villages in which voluntary cooperation is the condition of dignified and peaceful existence. Now, the nature of government. Gandhi presents the nature of government as such. The government cannot succeed in becoming entirely non-violent because it represents all the people. I do not today conceive of such a golden age, but I do believe in the possibility of a predominantly non-violent society, and I am working for it. There remains the question as to whether in an ideal society there should be any or no government. I do not think we need worry ourselves about this at the moment. If we continue to work for such a society, it will slowly come into being to be to an extent such that the people can benefit by it. Euclid line is one without breadth, but no one has so far been able to draw it and never will. All the same, it is only by keeping the ideal line in mind that we have made progress in geometry. What is true here is true of every ideal. In the absence of an ideal Ram Rajya, which Gandhi sets out to achieve, he encourages us to realize that the second best form of government would be such that is based on the principles of non-violence. Now let us discuss the power of non-violence. Non-violence in its dynamic condition means conscious suffering. It does not mean meek submission to the will of the evildoer, but it means the pitting of one's whole against the will of the tyrant. Working under this law of our being, it is possible for a single individual to defy the whole might of an unjust empire to save his honor, his religion, his soul, and lay the foundation of for that empire's fall or its regeneration. And what are active forces? The non-violence of Gandhi's conception is a more active and more of a real fighting against weakness, that retaliation whose very nature is to increase weakness. He contemplates a mental and therefore a moral opposition to immoralities. He seeks entirely to blunt the edge of the tyrant's sword, not by putting up against it a sharper edged weapon, but by disappointing his expectation that he would be facing physical resistance. It would be at first dazzle him, and at last compel recognition from him, which recognition would not humiliate him but would uplift him. It may be urged that this again is an ideal state, and so it is. Gandhi says that he admits that the strong will rob the weak and that it is a sin to be weak. But this is said of the soul in man, not of the body. If it were said of the body, we could never be free from the sin of weakness. But the strength of soul can defy a whole world in arms against it. This strength is open to the weakness in body. Non-violence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind. It is mightier than the mightiest weapon of destruction devised by the ingenuity of man. Destruction is not the law of the humans. Man lives freely by his readiness to die, if need be, at the hands of his brother, never by killing him. Every murder or other injury, no matter for what it is committed, conflicted on another, is a crime against humanity. Non-violence is like radium in its action. An infinitesimal quantity of it embedded in the malignant growth, which acts continuously, silently, and ceaselessly till it has transformed the whole mass of the diseased tissue into a healthy one. Similarly, even a little of truth, non-violence acts in a silent, subtle, unseen way and uplifts the whole society. Next point is matchless bravery. An armed soldier relies on his weapons for his strength. Take away from him his weapons, his guns, or his sword, and he generally becomes helpless. But a person who has truly realized the principles of non-violence has the God given strength for his weapon, and the world has not knowing anything that can match it. A small body of determined spirits, fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission, can alter the course of history. Non-violence of the strong is any day stronger than that of the bravest soldier fully armed. Next point is exercising faith. The hardest metal yields to sufficient heat. So even the hardest heart must melt before the heat of nonviolence, and there is no limit to the capacity of nonviolence to generate heat. Every action is a resultant of a multitude of forces, even of a contrary nature. There is no waste of energy, so we learn in the books on mechanics. This is equally true of human actions. The difference is that in one case we generally know the forces at work, and when we do, we can mathematically foretell the resultant. In the case of human actions, they result from a concurrence of forces, most of which we have no knowledge of. But our ignorance must not be made to serve the cause of disbelief in the power of these forces, and non-violence being the mightiest force in the world and also the most elusive in its working. It demands the greatest exercise of faith, even as we believe in God out of faith. So we have to believe in non-violence as a matter of faith. Violence, like water, when it has an outlet, rushes forward fiercely with an overwhelming force. Non-violence cannot act madly. It is the essence of discipline. But when it is set going, no amount of violence can crush it. For its full play, it requires unsullied purity and an unquenchable faith. Next point is non-violence is a science. Ahimsa is a science. The word failure has no place in the vocabulary of science. Failure to obtain the expected result is often the precursor to further discoveries. If the function of ahimsa is to devour all it comes across, the function of ahimsa is to rush into the mouth of hinsa. In an atmosphere of ahimsa, one has no scope to put his ahimsa to the test. It can be tested only in the face of hinsa. Violence can only be effectively met by non-violence. This is an old established truth that the weapon of violence, even if it was the atom bomb, became useless when matched against non-violence. That very few understand how to wield these mighty weapons is true. It requires a lot of understanding and strength of mind. It is unlike what is needed in military schools and colleges. The difficulty one experiences in meeting hinsa with ahimsa arises from the weakness of mind. Next point is the deed, not doer. Hate the sin, not the sinner, is a precept which, though easy enough to understand, is really practiced, and that is why the poison of hatred spreads in the world. This ahimsa is the basis of the search for truth. I am realizing every day that the search is vain unless it is founded on ahimsa as the basis. It is quite proper to resist and attack a system, but to resist and attack its author is tantamount to resisting and attacking itself. For we are all tarred with the same brush and are children of one and the same Creator, and as such, the divine powers within us are infinite. To slight a single human being is to slight those divine powers, and thus to harm not only that being, but with him the whole world. Man and his deeds are two distinct things, whereas a good deed should call forth approbation, and a wicked deed disapprobation. The doer of the deed, whether good or wicked, always deserves respect or pity, as the case may be. Those who seek to destroy men rather than manners adopt the latter, and become worse than those whom they destroy in the mistaken belief that manners will die with the men. They do not know the root of the evil. It is the acid test of nonviolence that in a nonviolent conflict there is no rancor left behind, and in the end the enemies are converted into friends. That was my experience in South Africa with General Smuts. He started with being my bitterest opponent and critic. Today he is my warmest friend. The principal implication of ahimsa is that the ahimsa in us ought to soften and not to stiffen our opponent's attitude to us. It ought to melt him. It ought to strike a responsive chord in his heart. As insight, can you say that you practice genuine ahimsa? Can you say that you receive the arrows of the opponents on your bare breast without returning them? Can you say that you are not angry, that you are not perturbed by his criticism? By reason of a lifelong practice of ahimsa, Gandhi claims to be an expert in it, though very imperfect. Speaking in absolute terms, he says, the more I practice it, the clearer I see how far I am from the full expression of ahimsa in my life. Apart from the philosophical justification for ahimsa in terms of the relativity of truth, there is also an ethical and moral basis for it, which Gandhi puts in terms of ends means relationship. In his words, the fruits of a tree will depend on what type of seed has been sown. Now we want to wind up this lecture, and thank you so much for your attention.